You think you want a good man's story. You think you want a clean lesson about morality, discipline, and character. But you are lying to yourself. The reason The Godfather spreads like a second religion for so many adult men isn't because it makes you sentimental. It isn't because it's about crime. It's because it teaches a brutal psychological truth. Power doesn't run on kindness. Power runs on control, timing, and the willingness to live with uncomfortable knowledge without flinching. And the hidden self you keep locked away is the part of you that already understands this, even if you refuse to admit it out loud. This video is going to hit the exact nerve most people avoid. We're going to take three legacies from The Godfather and translate them into modern life, not with wishy-washy be confident talk, with real mechanics, with the kind of thinking that changes how you handle love, enemies, money, loyalty, and family. Because most men are not failing from lack of effort. They are failing from self-deception. They say they want fairness, but they actually want comfort. They say they want respect, but they are addicted to winning emotional arguments. They say they want peace, but they keep choosing drama because drama makes them feel alive. So pay attention, because this is not a story about criminals. It is a mirror held too close to your face. In the opening scene, the room is dark, the curtains are closed. A man who claims to be honest walks in holding the trembling hope that someone powerful can restore his moral order. He has done everything right by his standards. He believed in the system. He followed the rules. Then his daughter gets brutalized, and suddenly the law looks like a costume that only fits certain people. He comes to Don Vito Corleone because he wants the world to obey his version of justice. He offers money like money is the language of reality. I will pay you whatever you want, whatever it takes. Just make it right. And Don Vito does something that should offend your ego. He refuses the money, not because he is naive, not because he is pure. He refuses because he understands something you keep forgetting. Money is cheap, not in the sense of being low value, but in the sense of being replaceable. Money can be exchanged. Money can be taken back. Money ends the moment the last coin leaves the hand. What doesn't end is obligation. What doesn't end is debt. He doesn't buy justice. He manufactures leverage. He builds a relationship that has weight. He turns a stranger into a participant in his world. And the price is not money. The price is the promise that someday he will owe him. And that someday might come when the stranger is weak. It might come when the stranger is desperate. It might come when the stranger thinks he is safe. This is the first legacy: create binding. In modern life, people pretend everything is transactional because it protects them from vulnerability. If everything is paid for, then no one can accuse you of caring. If everything is purchased, then you never have to feel the cost of being loyal. You can leave whenever you want. You can ghost without guilt. You can set boundaries like a security guard and call it maturity. But the hidden self knows what those boundaries really are for. They are often armor against being needed. The problem is that armor makes you cold, and cold people are easy to manipulate. You train others to treat you like a service provider, not a brother. You train them to keep you at arm's length because you act like warmth is a liability. Don Vito teaches a different strategy. He teaches that you can't build a family or an empire by paying bills. You build it by creating loyalty through action, through timing, through sacrifice that does not ask for immediate repayment. Notice the psychological shift. When you help someone without demanding fairness, you are not being generous in a naive way. You are creating a story in their mind. You become the person who helped before they could repay. That person becomes hard to throw away. A man who learns this stops performing righteousness and starts building networks of trust that are quiet but unbreakable. And yes, this is why The Godfather resonates with adult men. We live in a world where people love you like a customer. They respect you like a vendor. They disappear like a notification that no longer matters. So men look at a story where loyalty is sacred and realized, and they think finally, someone understands what adulthood actually costs. But here's where you have to stop romanticizing it. Binding is not helping everyone. Binding is calculated care. Binding requires you to choose who receives your energy, who receives your time, and who becomes part of your inner circle. Most men fail because they confuse kindness with access. If you give your attention to everyone, you end up connected to no one. You will become generous with your time and poor with your influence. And then you will blame society for not rewarding you when you actually trained people to use you. Now let's move to the second legacy, and it is the one that will make you uncomfortable. The movie's most famous line is not a joke. It's a survival principle dressed as cinema. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Most people react to enemies with emotional censorship. They block, they avoid, they cut contact, they write posts that try to prove they have moved on. They collect evidence for their own self-narrative. See, I am the mature one, I don't care. But blocking is not power.
Blocking is a fantasy of control. You think you eliminated danger. What you actually did is create darkness where you no longer see the threat. You gave your enemy exactly what they wanted: reduced visibility, reduced communication, reduced ability to predict your next move. A real operator does not eliminate the enemy by pretending they are gone. A real operator treats the enemy as data, and the hidden self hates that because data is cold. Data doesn't give you the comforting feeling of righteousness. Data makes you face the uncomfortable truth that someone can be dangerous and still have a position near you. In The Godfather, the enemy is not merely hated, the enemy is positioned. The enemy is kept close enough to be observed. The enemy is used to reveal information. Sometimes the enemy is fed a story until they make a move based on the lie they believe. This is what most people can't tolerate: the loss of emotional purity. You can't stay emotionally clean when you're playing a long game. In your life, your enemies might not be mafia members. They might be coworkers who smile while undermining you. They might be relatives who weaponize your guilt. They might be ex-partners who sabotage your new relationship because they can't stand your growth. They might be the person who constantly checks in on you. But every message is a hook, not a heart. Your first instinct is to punish them emotionally.
To block them, to remove them, to punish them with silence. But silence does two things at once. It protects you from their cruelty, and it blinds you to their strategy. Silence can become camouflage. If they want to destroy you, they will do it quietly. They will wait until you underestimate them. And if you have emotionally removed them from your world, you will have fewer signals, fewer observations, and fewer chances to detect patterns. So you behave like a man who can be calm without being passive. This is psychological discipline. You keep your enemies in your field of view. You don't let them live in the shadows of your imagination. You test what they do, you watch what they repeat, you notice the timing, you notice the triangulation, you notice who they try to recruit. It's not paranoia. Paranoia is when you invent threats without evidence. This is evidence-based control. Now think about Michel Corleone. The story escalates into a long, dark tunnel where revenge is not enough. Revenge is emotional. Michel's problem is that he is grieving, betrayed, and pressured. And if he responds like most men respond, he will trigger an all-out conflict that his family is not prepared to win. That's the trap. When you are wounded, you want to act immediately because action feels like power. But immediate action often creates a war you can't afford. Immediate action often hands your enemy exactly what they wanted: a clear reaction to exploit. Michel chooses the opposite. He swallows rage like it's poison. He puts on a mask of politeness. He sits with the enemy. He smiles. He shakes hands. He gives the enemy proximity instead of distance. To you, that may sound like weakness. To him, it's control. The psychological mechanism is simple, brutal, and useful. You can't manage danger when you treat it like an emotional contagion. You manage danger by converting emotions into information. Rage is loud. Information is quiet. Michel converts rage into observation. He keeps the enemy near enough to see their assumptions. He allows them to believe he is smaller, calmer, harmless. He creates a false sense of safety. Then, when the moment arrives, he strikes with precision. But the most valuable lesson is not the strike. The lesson is the timing. The lesson is the willingness to look at your enemy without turning it into a religion. And now we connect it to your daily life in 2026. You live in a world of digital proximity. People can watch you through stories, likes, comments, subtle surveillance. You can block them with one tap. But what does blocking do in a digital world? It removes your visibility, not theirs. You might lose the ability to see who they are trying to recruit. You might lose the ability to see what they are repeating. You might lose the ability to see whether they are escalating. So instead of blocking your enemy out of emotion, you practice something harder: neutral engagement. Smile, be civil, speak only when necessary, gather information, observe their pattern. In real work environments, this often means you document. It means you don't let their narrative become the default narrative. It means you keep your boundaries firm but your expression controlled. You stop broadcasting pain, because the enemy feeds on pain you broadcast. When you mock them publicly, you give them content. When you vent, you recruit allies against yourself. When you explode emotionally, you become evidence that you can be manipulated. But when you remain stable, you make them work harder. You remove the reward for their cruelty. And stability is not passivity. Stability is a weapon. Now let's go deeper, because this is where most men break. The third legacy is about family, and it is where the Godfather becomes a psychological knife. Don Vito Corleone is portrayed as brutal,
ruthless, and strategic, and yet he is also portrayed as deeply devoted to family. The story insists on a contrast. Cold violence outside is not allowed to contaminate the sacred inside. He doesn't bring the job to the dinner table. He doesn't carry war into marriage. He doesn't let the logic of killing become the logic of love. This is not sentimental. This is structural. If you treat your family like a battlefield, your family becomes hostage to your worst self. If you treat your job like a temple, where nothing matters, you might succeed publicly and collapse privately. Your marriage doesn't die because you failed to provide money. It dies because you failed to provide emotional leadership. It dies because your presence turned into absence. It dies because the people closest to you started to feel like strangers. And your children don't suffer because you are busy. They suffer because you are predictable in the wrong way. They learn that your attention is conditional. They learn that warmth is an exception, not a baseline. This is why the legacy of family isn't soft. It's non-negotiable. It's the foundation. Without it, your achievements are hollow. Many men misunderstand this. They think family is where they rest after they win. They treat love like a reward they cash in only if they survive the week. But love is not a trophy. Love is a discipline. When you do not protect it, it rots quietly.
And rot is more dangerous than fire because people don't recognize it until it's too late. Michel's tragedy proves it. Michel loves his family, but he loves it through strategy until he destroys it through strategy. He makes decisions that are meant to protect the dynasty, and he treats loyalty like a political resource. At first, it looks like strength. It looks like control. He becomes ruthless enough to end threats. But the deeper he goes, the more he sacrifices the human ties that make family, family. There is a point where you stop asking, what is right for the people I love, and you start asking, what is best for the organization. And that shift is subtle. It feels responsible. It feels mature. But it produces loneliness. Michel ends up with power and with an empty house. He wins wars and loses warmth. His wife leaves. His siblings die. The people he claimed to protect stop recognizing him as a human being and start seeing him as a threat. The heartbreaking image of him alone, staring into autumn, is not just a cinematic moment, it is the psychological outcome of men who confuse control with care. Care is not control. Care is closeness. Care is attention. Care is the refusal to let your external world poison your internal world. So the lesson is not, be nice. The lesson is separate systems. Separate the battlefield logic from the home logic. Separate the enemy logic from the family logic. When you come home, the war stops being your identity. Bring your strength, not your violence. Bring your stability, not your suspicion. Bring your attention, not your calculations. And if you can't do this, then you don't have a family problem. You have an identity problem. You are outsourcing your self-worth to conflict. You are addicted to the adrenaline of pressure. You are using work, money, and dominance as substitutes for connection. That addiction is common in modern men, especially those who learned early that love is conditional. They were praised for performance and punished for feelings. They learned that tenderness is dangerous. They learned that if they show vulnerability, someone will use it against them. So they build a life where vulnerability never gets a seat at the table. But eventually, something breaks. The hidden self demands honesty, and when it doesn't get honesty, it demands revenge. Now, the fourth legacy is the psychological bridge between all three legacies, and it's the one most men need because it explains their pattern of self-sabotage. The Godfather teaches that the world is a game of incentives, and most people refuse to admit this because admitting it would destroy their moral self-image. You say you want fairness, but fairness is a story you tell to avoid responsibility. Fairness lets you believe the universe owes you emotional outcomes. You say you want loyalty, but loyalty scares you because loyalty creates obligations you can't escape. You say you want love, but love requires you to be seen, and being seen creates risk. So the hidden self compromises. It builds a life of half-truths. You use money to buy safety, and then you wonder why you feel lonely. You use anger to feel strong, and then you wonder why no one respects you. You use silence to feel in control, and then you wonder why you're blind to what's happening around you. The exit is not moral purity. The exit is strategic honesty. Be clear about what you're doing. When you help someone, ask yourself if you're building binding or building a public performance. When you avoid an enemy, ask yourself if you're protecting yourself or hiding from reality. When you commit to family, ask yourself if you're protecting them emotionally or protecting your ego from guilt. Then you act like an adult. And adulthood looks different from the fairy tales you were told. Adulthood looks like you help someone before they can repay you. Not to buy their gratitude, but to build loyalty that survives time. Adulthood looks like you don't let your enemies disappear because you can't afford to be blind. You keep your eyes open, you keep your tone controlled, you keep your information. Adulthood looks like you refuse to bring the logic of the street into the dining room. It is brutal because it requires self-audit, not self-justification. Now